Okay, NCE mini panel setup number 2, part B, something like that. Let's just get into it. I printed out an example of what my panel is going to look like. If you notice here on this printout, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different turnouts. Some of these turnouts are standalone, like this one and this one. The rest of these go to crossovers. So those crossovers, the way I have them configured in my switch 8, instead of having 2 separate switches plugged into 2 different terminals, I have them going into one terminal. So that when I throw a switch, for example, I believe this one is actually 102. When I throw that, both go at the same time because they're both going into the same terminal. I don't have to throw 101 and then 102. So that's just the way that I configured it. If you're using push buttons, the push button itself, when you program it, you can program it for a single task, or you can program it to do multiple tasks in a row in a sequence. But just keep in mind that when you push that button, it's going to follow that sequence. You cannot tell it to do something else if you push it again. So if you have, for example, if you have a ladder like I do on my other panel for my yard, I've got multiple switches lined up in a row. So when I push the button in the closest most part of the yard, it only throws that one switch. But if I want to go all the way through that ladder to the end, I've got a button over there that will throw 4 switches in a row and line up that whole section. But if I push that button again, it's not going to do anything because all of those things are already thrown. So when you're using push buttons, keep in mind that if you want to do something else, for example, you can set up a push button to throw that turnout. Well, how do you get it to come back? Well, you got to put another button in. So you need 2 buttons, one to do one command of throwing it and one to do the other command of closing it. The workaround to that would be to use a toggle momentary switch, because you have one command by throwing it one way, and then you have another command by throwing it the opposite way. So that would work perfect for turnouts that you're constantly throwing back and forth, because you can hook it up and throw the switch one way, the turnouts will close, create the crossover, and then you can throw it the other way and those will go back straight. That would be the ideal situation. You still will need 3 to 4 wires, as you can see I've got made up over here, when we go and program this thing. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to build my panel off of one of these printouts that I did. Once I get to that and I get the wood and the panel, and I'll show you how to do the LEDs and all that, we'll get to that. Okay, so this one came up as being connected to the mini panel. This one is my wireless cab, which I'm going to show you going back to our other video. If you remember, we programmed this tortoise to be number 501. So just to pick up where we left off, I'm going to see if I can throw that. If it still works, it should. I'm going to hit Select Accessory. 501 is still in there because it's the last turnout that I used here. So I'm going to hit Enter. I'm going to go reverse and see if that throws the turnout. And it does. So my wireless cab is talking to my NCE system. The system is recognizing the NCE switch 8 as the accessory, which is connected to the tortoise, and I can throw that back and forth. Here we go again. And it turns. So now what we want to do is we want to program this toggle switch, and I want it to throw that tortoise. Okay, so I'm going to set my wireless cab aside for a moment. Turn that off so the batteries don't run out. Now, again, in order to get into the NCE panel, the track power has to be off. Your command station or power cab has to be off. And then plug in your cab to your panel and then turn it all on. You get to this menu. So the first thing that we want to do is my plug here, I have one of these blue wires plugged into port 25. The other one is plugged into port 26. And then the third wire, the orange wire here, is actually plugged into the ground. So when I throw those, it's going to do something. First, we have to tell it what to do. So from the main screen here, I'm just going to hit enter. And it's going to go into setup. And I am going to tell it that I want to set up a new command. So we're going to hit 1. And we're going to select input, because that's actually what these are. They are inputs. So we're going to say 1. The first input that I'm going to program is going to be 25. So we'll say program number 25 and then hit enter. And it's going to ask you for the steps. Now you get 4 steps per input. So we're going to say step number 1. We'll hit enter. You have a choice of whether it's an accessory or a macro. We're going to do an accessory. The accessory number is the number we assign to the tortoise. So that's 501. We're going to hit enter. And what do we want to do to that accessory? Do we want to throw it normal or throw it in reverse? Well, I'm going to tell it to throw normal. And then it automatically takes you to the next step. In this case, we don't have a next step for input 25. So I'm just going to hit the escape key, and that's going to take us back to the setup. So now we want to program 26. So we're going to go back into setup. We're going to do an input. This time we're going to tell it to do 26. Hit enter. Now it brings us to the step numbers. We're going to do step number 1. We're going to make it an accessory because that's what we're working with. The accessory number is 501. That's what we assigned to the tortoise. And this time we're going to tell it to go into reverse. So we're going to throw the tortoise in the other direction. So I hit number 2, and then it brings us immediately to step 2. We don't have any other step 2s. There's no other commands that we're going to follow through with. So here I'm just going to hit escape, and it's going to bring me back to the original screen. Now, all we have to do is test it. So how do we do that? Actually, I believe we've got to get out of this. So I'm just going to unplug this. And I'm not 100% sure if you need to power cycle it, but I'm going to turn off my track power anyway, and then I'm going to start it back up again. You can notice my switch 8 resets, and it looks like it's ready. So now when I take this momentary switch that I've soldered cables to, if I throw this in one direction, it sends the signal through the switch 8 to the tortoise. If we go in the opposite direction, it throws the tortoise in the other direction. That's how simple it is. The mini panel functions as if it were an actual cab. It is sending that information to the command station as if it was a cab. So when you normally get a controller with your NCE system, it comes with a cab address. If you go to add more controllers onto your layout, all of those different controllers need to have different addresses. Otherwise, you're going to run into confusion. The same goes for the mini panel. When you plug the mini panel in and you start going through the configurations, you need to go into the setup of your mini panel, into config, and actually set your cab address. So for example, my cab address for this mini panel is set to 20. So if you wanted to check your cab address, you'll notice that when you plug your cab in, like this cable here just goes directly to my cab bus. When you plug this in, you'll see very briefly it's going to come up and say cab address. For this cab, it showed me 03. I'll do that once again, just so you guys can catch it real quick. Cab address 03. Right? Now, for a wireless one, you could do the same thing. You can plug it in, and it'll come up. And for this one's actually 05. Let me do that again for you. Cab address 05. Now, what if you wanted to change that? Let's say you get a new throttle. All your cabs come as 02 from the very beginning. So if you actually hold down your select loco button and then plug in your cab, you'll get into a setup area where it asks you what cab number you want to use, and here you can program it to whatever you want, and then you can escape out of it and it will return to normal. When you get a new mini panel, it's suggested that you do the same. Okay, fellas, that concludes the setup portion, the tech part of the mini panel. If you got any questions on it or you need some more info, you can either go to NCE, their website's got a lot of info, or check with me. If I know the answer, I'll give it to you. If not, if I have time, I'll research it for you. Leave some comments and questions down below. Hit that button to hit the bell and subscribe and all that jazz. I'm going to go ahead and end it here, and my next video is going to be actually building the panel with the buttons on it. But that's going to be a while because I ordered some buttons. I was out of buttons. But with the current crisis going on, I can't get the buttons. So it's probably going to be like a couple weeks before I can get that. So as soon as they come in, I'll get started on it. Of course, starting the camera and take you guys along for the journey. And we'll go from there. And as always, my rail riders, let's ride these rails together. See you later.